My name is Tobias Nyholm. I'm going to talk to you about the Symfony internals. Here's my Twitter handle, so if you want to harass me for the next 45 minutes, I can't really defend myself, so please do or please don't. And I believe we're going to talk about the Symfony internals because Symfony is just a tool. It's just something you use for your work. I mean, and if you understand your tool better, you're going to be better at your work, right? So I'm going to try to explain the concepts of Symfony. Show of hands, how many of you using Symfony today? Almost everybody. How many of you know the Symfony internals? It's only a few. Okay, that's excellent. If I ask the questions then later at my talk, then I hope most of you raised your hands. Short about me, I work at a company called Happier. We try to match up companies and people using soft skills. I do plenty of Symfony. I'm running the PHP meetups in Stockholm, and I'm also doing plenty of open source. I started my real first open source career in 2015. There was a new PSR for caching coming out, and me and my friend, we like, hey, let's build doctoring adapters for this. So what we end up doing is we actually implemented the full standard. So we created PHP cache, and at the same time, I was being interested in something called HTTP plug, which is basically an abstraction over HTTP clients. So when you're doing a lot of HTTP clients, you're obviously doing a lot of API clients, and that comes a lot of mail clients. And I wrote the best practice how you write your best API client. And nowadays I'm maintainer of both Gustle and Bus and PHP, HTTP, or a lot of clients, and also writing my PSR. And I'm doing a lot of testing, and I'm doing a lot of geocoding, and I do plenty more. The most fun library here is the NSA library. It totally violates class privacy. So accessing private properties and methods is super simple with NSA. Someone got the joke, sure, fine. So, when I started doing PHP, I obviously wanted to reuse some classes between projects, so I started to build my own framework. And I think most of you have done this. I did this because I didn't know of frameworks. I mean, I didn't know that I was building a framework at the time. But I wanna try building a framework with you on stage now. Is that a fair challenge? Thank you. So let's start simple. Let's start with just a bunch of files. As you've seen in previous talks, you have a file like this, and you probably include functions.func.php or whatever. And this is actually a pretty nice framework or pretty nice file. I hope all of you understand this. It just reads the query parameter and say, is this the foo page or the start page? And then you show the specific page, and then you add some admin stuff if it is localhost. This is super simple, right? I would like some feedback for you just staring at me like. So when you run this, you get the result like this. Still no anything strange. So I must stress that nothing really is faster than this. This is the fastest framework you can have. So because it doesn't use, I mean, it's not a lot of code, right? But we want to improve. We want to do something better. And someone told us that PSR 7 is a great thing. I mean, the PSR that describes HTTP objects. So let's use some HTTP objects. Let's implement some requests and responses. So what we do here, we just create a request using a request factory, and we create them from globals, as you see. And then we're using that request, instead of accessing the global variables, you're just using that request object to access the variables. And then instead of echoing out your thing, you're just creating a new response clause. This is a minor improvement, and the results look like this. And if you go to the foo page, you see here I write question mark page equals foo, you get something like this. So this is not really interesting, right? You were expecting some more. And in fact, this doesn't really scale very well. I mean, we have a lot of, in this case, we have 2 controllers. Imagine if we have 10 controllers or 100 controllers. And imagine if we have more HTML in our responses as well. I mean, this doesn't really scale. So let's put these pages in in separate files. Let's put them in something called controllers. So we add some more files to our framework now. So someone told us that having the index.php file in a subdirectory is great. It's security stuff. So we put it in a separate directory. And then we added it's two monitors, so I'm pointing it. Then we added two controllers. And our HT access is just a file that tells the web server how to handle this. The first two lines are pretty magic, and then they have something here that removes index.php from the URL. And then the bottom two lines says pretty much, if this is an actual file, serve the file. And the very last line says, route everything to index.php. So this is our new controller. I mean, you can notice this line is different. We actually include the path for our outloader were changed. And we're also using the URI path instead of some query parameter. And we added some. We instantiated our controller classes and run the function on them. And then we also added a 404 response. The controllers looks like this. It's super simple. It's nothing exciting here either. And the result looks like this. If you have the foo page that now /foo instead of the ugly query parameters. So we feel pretty good about ourselves now. We actually extracted some code and have some more files. So this actually looks a little bit better. But we don't really like this routing we're doing. I mean, we still have a lot of routing and a lot of decision here. If I'm adding a new controller, I still need to edit this file a lot, right? So let's introduce something called an event loop. And we're doing this to avoid putting more and more stuff in index.php. So an event loop, it's basically a middleware runner. And I did not realize that all these talks today are going to talk about middlewares. But an event loop is pretty much a middleware runner. And what I'm doing is I create an array of my middlewares, like this. And then I initiate a runner somehow, and I give that runner all my middlewares, and I run it with both the request and response. So what I'm basically doing, I'm running my first middleware, and then running the next middleware in a chain, and at the end, I will get the response. This is one of the major, thank you, this is one of the major steps. I want to make sure that you're with me so far. So let's have a look at the router middleware. It's basically just a class that implements the invoke. And I do the very same thing here. I'm doing a switch case. It's basically just a lot of if statements. So I say, if they use the slash, then use the start page controller. And if it's foo, use the foo controller. And we are okay how middleware works. Great. The result looks like this. And nothing really changed so far in the results. And you can ask, what did we really win here? Why did we add this event loop? Why didn't we just call the router from here directly? And the answer is, we want to have an easy way to add more stuff. Using middleware, we can easily add more stuff. And I'll prove this point by adding cache. I mean, our framework is already super duper fast, but adding cache will speed things up. So a cache thing that's a new thing, a new feature. That's why we have a new middleware for this. And I'm using something very simple. I started with an APCU cache pool. And then in my invoke function, I basically look at the request, try to figure out a good cache key, like the URL. And I look, have I seen this URL before? If I have seen it, then I just serve this, whatever I've cached. If I have not seen it, I'll continue with my middleware loop. And then when I got the response, I saved the response in cache, so I can use it for later. And the only thing I added in my index.php file is this line. I just add another middleware. And the cool thing here is the cache doesn't really know about the router, and the router doesn't know about the middleware. I can use them independently of each other. They don't care, they don't know of each other's existence. They just run the next middleware. If I see how the result will be, it will be something like this still. I will tell you, however, that if you refresh this page, it will be super fast. It will be way faster than before. But the result is the same. So sure, we made an improvement. We understood the middleware runner. But what if we're using this framework for our development? we can't really have a cache there when developing, because we want to see the changes that we're doing on the controllers, right? So we want to have a way to turn off the cache and turn on the cache again. And of course, we can just comment out this line, but since we are software engineers, we're better than this, just making comments. So we want to have a way to configure things. And if you want to configure things, you should have a place to put your configuration, and that's where we're going to talk about containers. This is where we were just now before containers. This is our index.php file. And adding containers is basically, I'm taking these middleware creation thing, and I put them in another class. And I choose to call that class my kernel. So did you see what I'm doing? I'm going to jump back and forth. I just took a lot of code and put it in the handle function of my kernel. And my kernel it's a quite large class, to be honest. It has about 100 lines of code, but it's pretty simple. Here I just include a lot of things, and then I'm constructing it with an environment, and then I'm telling if this is a debug mode or not. And I'm also checking, in my handle function, this is what I copied from the index.php, and also have a boot function. The boot function just boots up the kernel, you will see. And the point of the handle function is it takes in the request and returns a response. So let's have a look at my boot function. This is the messy thing. And if you can read and understand this, you're an excellent developer. If you can't, I mean, this is just a lot of weird things. Anyhow, I don't want to discourage anyone. The idea here is that we take a container and we try to add a lot of parameters to it. We add a lot of service configuration files. We add services.yaml, and we also add services_some environment.yaml, and then we compile it and store it on a disk, in a cache on disk. So next time we run the boot function, we can use the cached container. So this just reads my document, my configuration, and uses it. So the project has grown quite large now. I added some services definitions. And I still have my public folder. I have a source directory with some controllers and middlewares. And I have a var directory, which I thought was a good name. And here I added some cache. I changed my APCU cache to a file cache, because file cache is easier to remove. And as you can see, I have a cache for dev environment and production environment. You're nodding. Excellent. Thank you. And looking at my services files, they just like they declare that here's the service ID, and this is the class, and here's the arguments that used to create this class. And I know you all have seen this before. This is not really interesting. What I could say is interesting is I have a service ID called cache, and when I'm loading my development services YAML, like you see to the right, I just override that with a void cache. And a void cache, I mean, it was some guy who said the void cache is a cache with amnesia. So it doesn't really remember anything. So it's just that, yes, I stored it, but it doesn't deliver a response. So this is how I not caching anything in development. This was actually quite a big step to adding a container. And now we can do dependency injection, which is a great thing. People telling me that dependency injection is great for testing, and I blindly believe that. And we can also configure application with a YAML now. And I think you all understand how this works, and I think you also understand that this is the result after adding the major refactoring. It's still the same. Let's talk about the router for a moment. We know a router. It was something like this. This is not really, again, it's not really scalable. This is just showing 2 routes and 1 404. And if I simplify, I mean, you see the middleware things. If I simplify this, just showing the important things. This is a lot of code for just a few number of routes. What if we would add some more routes? I mean, I am having 6 or 7 routes here, but what if we had 100 routes or 1,000 routes? We have to be a little bit more sophisticated. And also, look at, I have an ID here, which it's a placeholder. It's a dynamic route, so I have this placeholder for an integer. I have to somehow fix and match this. The thing is, I don't want to do 100 if statements for 100 routes, because that takes a lot of time. So I try to be a little bit more clever. I'm doing something, routing something like this. So I'm basically saying that if my routes start with admin something something, then I should check my admin routes only and nothing else. So this makes sure that I don't execute 100 if statement from 100 routes. And I check if my routes start with image something, then I just checking the 3 cases for the image routes. And as you can see here, yes, this is only 7 routes. Yes, it's a mess. And as you may see, I'm doing a lot of preg matching. And preg matching, that's pretty slow, or not. It's not fast. Doing 100 preg match will definitely slow down your performance. So let's try to be a little more, even a little more sophisticated. Let's read a blog post from Nikita, like a PHP core contributor. He said you should do something like this. So he basically puts all your routes, all your static routes in an array. So you can, with one if statement, see, is this a static route or not? Even though you have 100 routes, you have one if statement checking if this was a route, is it a hit or not. And for dynamic routes, that's way more complicated, I'm sorry. You have a fancy, big, regular expression that's trying to figure out if this is a match or not. And if you're a bit smart with your regular expression, you only have one reg match to check if this was a match or not, and you will know which line it matched. And you could argue, doing one really fat regular expression, isn't that more time-consuming than doing 100 small ones? And sorry, it was a rhetorical question. I didn't really expect an answer. I would only assume that you were saying that regular expression is evaluated in C, and C is super fast. And doing 100 calls is actually way slower than doing one big fat one. So what I'm doing here, I'm having my regular expression. I'm checking, did I get a match? And then I find the match, building up some parameters, and then I'm just calling the controller down here. I'm calling the controller and get the response back. And if I didn't have any match from either the static ones or the dynamic ones, I just return a 404. So as you might have anticipated, the results looks like this. Even though we have this fast routing. But remember in the beginning we had something like admin stuff at the bottom, right? And we want to bring that back. So we want to add some security to actually validate that this is an admin that's visiting the site. So security is a new thing. So we're adding a new middleware. And this is a naive example for how security could be handled. We basically just check if we are on local host and you're trying to access admin. No, sorry. If you're not on local host and try to access admin, you'll get the 403 response. And you can also have a check like, if you're trying to remove an image and you're not user Bob, then you should get access to 9. This works, but we could be a little bit smarter. This does not really scale very well. So let's try to separate authentication from authorization. What I'm saying is, let's separate from who are you to what are you allowed to do. These are two separate things, authentication and authorization. So let's start with authentication. I've chosen to implement this with a token storage, which is basically a place where you store value objects. It's not, I mean, it has a getter and setter. It isn't really fun. And I want to create some, sorry. And here I'm doing some, I'm checking for these parameters, these service parameters, if I have the user or password. And if you're not trying to access admin, then I don't care about authentication. But if I am trying to access admin and you don't have any username, I'll show you this long, ugly response, which will bring up a HB basic login window. And yeah, I'm gonna stop there. We'll see this in a moment, I believe. And a new thing, I just add a new middleware in my kernel. And when I try to access admin, I'll get a login window like this. And then I just add my credentials. And here's the result. It says, hello Tobias. Yeah, and here's my admin controller. It just grabs my username from the token storage. However, I was making a small mistake. I will show you this. If I have an admin, if I have a password, and if I have a username, I could check with like a user provider or something if that username and password will match. And if they do match, I save them to the token storage. So I have the username in the token storage. And then I move on to the next request. That's why I could fill in my credentials, and in my admin controller, I could say hello username. So right now we're letting everybody in. I mean, sure, we're letting anybody in with no password as well, but we want to have we're going to check who you are. We only want to let in people named Tobias. So this again, I'm going to separate authentication from authorization. So now let's look at authorization. Since I want to build something that scales pretty well, and I should only have I want to respect the single responsibility principle. So I add this pattern of voters. I can have one middleware that asks all my voters, like, here's a request. Do you, voter, you accept this? Do you think it's granted, or do you deny access to this resource? Or you can also vote to abstain. So this is my middleware, authorization middleware. So I just run over all my voter and see if someone denies it, I deny the request. If everybody grants it, then it's fine. And a single voter implementation looks something like this. I check the request and I see the token storage. If there were a user in token storage named Tobias and we try to access admin, sorry, if it was not named Tobias and tried to access admin, then I should not grant this access. Do you feel like you understand token storages and security? You're equally convinced. That amazes me. No, that does not amaze me. It doesn't surprise me. I knew you would get this. The service declaration looks something like this. It's again not a big thing. I add my voters and I have a voter for admin and a voter for image, and they all will go to the voter middleware. Nothing interesting. And my voter looks something like this. My kernel looks something like this when I add in my middlewares. I'm just adding a line here. And yeah, and obviously the authorization has to be after authorization. Before you can ask what you're going to do or what you're allowed to do, I need to ask who are you, right? So if I try to access admin and I'm not logged in, I'll get a forbidden response. Let's talk about auto-wiring. There's quite a few services that I have declared now. I mean, you saw my service declaration. And what if we're going to find a way to register the services automatically? I mean, it would be nice if I could write something like this. I can say that everything should be not public and everything should be auto-wired by default. And I should take everything in app and everything in my resource folder and add it to a namespace app. Same thing with controller, but I just add a tag. And same thing with my security thing. And this is actually pretty sweet. However, it seems like it registers everything that's in app. Maybe everything is in app is not really supposed to be registered, right? So how Autowiring really works is if I have a bunch of services, just like this, and I have 3 public services, P is for public, not private, P is for public. So when I actually compile my container in the boot method, then I'm looking at all my services, try to figure out the relationships. I'm looking at the constructor parameters and the type hints, and I'm going to find that some services depend on each other. And if a service is public, I can access it directly from the container. I mean, no questions asked. However, if it's private, I know exactly where this service is being used because of this graph or schedule here. So since I know that there's a private service here that's not being used by anything, I just remove it. Same thing with this service. It's not being used, so I remove it. And I'll continue with this until I removed all my private services that are not used. So I've removed everything that's not really needed. So this is how there's no damage, or there's no delay or performance issues by registering everything as a service. Because if they're private, they're just being removed anyways. And by using Autowiring, I can just use the fancy class constants like this. So I don't have to remember this arbitrary service ID anymore. The result of using Autowiring, yeah, the website still looks like this. And it's not cached, because it's not cached. Say, when I'm developing this framework, I want to have some tools or metrics that help me developing. So I would really like to add some toolbar, right? Say that gives me some metrics about how the request performed. So since the toolbar is a new thing, I add a new middleware. I call it the toolbar middleware. And I basically get the response and add some HTML to the response. And then I just go to the next middleware. And as you see, I have been using something called a cache data collector. And a cache data collector is basically just a class that decorates my cache. So with this, I can add some metadata. I mean, every time you call get item, I'm adding some metadata here. I could have metadata like how long did the cache call take, what did the response was from the cache, and right here I'm just adding the number of times it got called. So with this data collector and this fancy toolbar, I have a response like this, which is different. I have a result like this, which is different. Yeah. So, and you see, I'm using the URL and IP and some cache calls. This is how you basically add. This is how you basically add things to the request. Yeah, and toolbar gets injected automatically, and you know all this. And point here is also the cache component doesn't care about this. The router doesn't care about this. The security doesn't really care about this. It all works independently. And also, if I do something stupid, if I accidentally throw an exception, I want to have some help, right? So I want to do something like an exception handler or helper. So it's a new thing, so I added a new middleware, and I just wrap everything in a try-catch. And if there is an exception, I catch it and just print the exception message. And I add this obviously first in my middleware chain, and I get the response like this if I visiting this controller. So, and obviously you can be a little more friendly here. You can add a stack trace, or you can add a big red banner saying what the exception really was and why, etc. But I think I understand it, and I do know I told you a lot of information now, but every step were quite simple. I mean, you even nodded your head and thought this was quite simple. And the full project looks something like this. There's basically nothing new here. So I mean, this is my full project, and my compose.json file looks something like this. I had added some cache and added some fancy PSR7 implementation and some other stuff. And you could be asking now, where is Symfony? Right? I've been talking now for like a good 30 minutes, but where is Symfony? I may switch to a demo now. Are you ready for a demo? Yeah, I'll switch for a demo. I'm waiting for the 5-minute sign. Mirror. Firing up my project. You see what I see, right? Is it too small? It's fine. Excellent. I added some debugger, and I got to start up Safari. And I will also fire up, yeah, I already started my PHP server. And if I go to Safari, tries to autocomplete and auto-fetch things. So if I go to my server now, the first thing I entered in the index.php file. So I create my kernel, and I go into handle. And here in handle, I go into boot function. I'm just stepping through here. And I haven't built anything before. So it reads some parameters, it adds some JAMA loader, and reads my service configuration, and then it dumps it. And now it's starting to create my middleware chain. And then I run my middleware chain. So now I'm getting to the first exception handler. That's fine. Now I'm going to the authentication, which checks, trying to get my password and username. And since this is not admin, I don't care. I go to the next one. And now in my security voter, and it goes through all the voters. The first voter votes. This chooses the abstain voting. And then the second voter runs. And now I was passing. Now in the next middleware, which is caching, I try to figure out some cache key. And here I'm getting the item, and this is my cache data collector. It just wraps and adds some metadata. And I say, well, it wasn't a hit, so I'm actually, it wasn't a hit, so I run the next chain in the middleware, which is my router. I use the old router here because it's easier to read. And now I'm executing my controller. My controller just returns a response with the current date. And now I got a response, and I do everything backwards. Here is my toolbar. No, I don't do anything backwards. I just continue with the middleware chain. I'm adding things in my toolbar. And now I'm done. I'm closing down some things, saving the request in cache, exception handler, and then I'm just printing the response. And the result looks something like this. And as you see, if I update this, the time is updating, right? It says, no, you don't see it. It says 58. I mean, I'm running the full framework. I'm running the controller all the time now, right? So what if I go to the production environment and I say, this is not debugging? Now you know I'm using not the void cache, I'm using actually file cache. So if you see it in my var folder, I have a cache for production. I have nothing here, as you see. And now when I update this, I get a new time because it actually ran my controller. But if I refresh this again, I'll get the same response. Because now I do have something in my file cache, and this is the cached response. I'm going to go back to my presentation now. Or you obviously also want to see, you obviously also want to see, what if I go to admin? Not helping. I don't think that's it. Yeah, if I go to admin. Now I'm going to go in here again. I'm going to boot again. I'm going to redo the kernel and the exception. And now I'm checking, do I have an authentication and password? Do I have a username and password? It is admin, so I go back. And auth is empty, as you see here. So I'm actually going to get a 401 response. So I have to fill in something, and I write my name and my secret password. And when I log in, it's going to start all over again. And when I finally get to I finally got to the security middleware, and I got the security voter, and this is my admin voter, and it says the username is Tobias, so we don't say access denied. And then caching, blah blah, and I'm finally getting back to my controller, and the response looks like this: hello, Tobias. So I'll go back to my presentation now, because I think you do know this by heart by this time. So where is Symfony? I've been talking for 35 minutes now, and we haven't mentioned Symfony once. And the framework we built on the stage is Symfony. It's exactly how Symfony works. And now you all know exactly how it works. I mean, sure, specific details will vary, but that's just details, right? We still have the HTTP objects and with request and response flow. We have the same way of putting our framework code and to integrate with the our code, our controllers, and we have an event loop. In our case, we only have the similar to the kernel request. Symfony's case, they have plenty more events. They have kernel controller, kernel response, and kernel terminate. And it's just basically just they have multiple middleware runners. And by using multiple middleware runners, they can support something like showing the toolbar even though there is an exception. Symfony also uses cache, PSR6, PSR16, as we see. We also have the container that we build, and you know how to build in a different environment. You know how that really works. And we also talked about a simple router. We talked about the Symfony 4.0 router. And we also know how the super lightning fast Symfony.1 router works. We spent a little bit of time of security talking about authentication and authorization. And we know how this works. I mean, sure, we used to cover HTTP basic, but the concept is the same for login forms or API or whatever. We do know how Autowiring works under the hood. We do know why Symfony 4 is making everything private by default. We do know how the toolbar works, and we also have seen an example of data collectors. And we know how the exception page is so pretty like this. So I will say this actually was Symfony, or at least a simple version of Symfony. The thing that is missing from our framework is basically we don't have a CLI support, which is basically just another event loop or a middleware runner. And we don't have third-party support, like for bundles. So if we're going to make this proper Symfony, we obviously need some changes. We're going to change my PSR7 implementation to Symfony HTTP Foundation. We're going to change our middleware runners to the event dispatcher. And we're going to change the cache thing for Symfony cache. And also, instead of our custom kernel and custom security, we use the Symfony HTTP kernel and Symfony security. So what I'm going to stress is, at the beginning, I asked you, do you know Symfony internals? And we just built Symfony internals on stage, but we didn't call it Symfony. So I will say, you all know Symfony internals now. I'm not sure we do have time for questions, because I'm getting multiple warnings here that on time. We may have 2 questions. I'll take this first gentleman over here, the 3rd row. And then I do a small seg, and then I'm going to talk to you back there.
Let's bump it as Symfony 5 right now.
Sure. Everybody got to appreciate that. Hello? Nope. I can say, but while I have mic troubles, that I'm not a Symfony expert. I mean, there's plenty of Symfony to know. I just know, I knew like 4 or 5 components really well, but there's so many components I haven't really looked at. And some components are so complicated that I don't really understand them. So I want to encourage you to say, Symfony is not big magic. It's just many things. And so if you want to contribute to Symfony or anything, just do as I do. Pick the easiest components and contribute to them. I know workflow and messenger, and I knew some bootstrap form validation things, but that's the simple stuff, and that's what I like to work with. The workflow components, I only have like 15 classes. So super simple. Your question.
Okay, sorry for my questions. What does NDA mean?
What does what mean?
NDA.
NDA?
Oh, yep.
Like a non-disclosure agreement?
Because I need to finish my bingo game, and... So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in the middle over there, he has a question, and then I think we're going to leave.
Yeah.
You raised your hand again, so the mic guy sees you.
Thank you for your speech, and I have one question about PSR7 middleware implementation.
Yes.
Can you please tell me why should I use your implementation except, for example, Zendiactor's implementation?
Instead of what implementation?
Zendiactor's, for example.
Oh, no, it's, okay. My PSR7 implementation, I wrote it because I found some bugs and issues with both Zend and Gussel's PSR7 implementation. And I also wrote it because I want to have a super minimalistic one. My implementation has barely 2,000 lines of code, compared to Gussel has over 5,000 lines, and Zend is pretty similar. And there's no real reason. I wrote it for a fun practice. There's no real reason. Use whatever you like the most.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do appreciate if you leave me some feedback on this talk. I mean, if you tell me what you liked and what you disliked. And there's a link on Join In, so I'll be happy to receive any comments. I'll be around, so if you have any more questions, I'll be in the speaker's corner. Thank you very much.